noticed how confusing all the advice about what to eat can be? Like one day, eggs are a superfood, and the next, they're practically poison.
Yeah, it's like make up your mind already, right?
Right. And don't even get me started on the whole fat versus carbs debate. It seems like the experts are always changing their minds. It's enough to make anyone just want to give up and eat whatever they want. But for you, our listeners, we wanted to dig a little deeper and try to make some sense of it all.
Yeah, that's why for this deep dive, we're taking a closer look at some really interesting sources, including this fascinating documentary from RATE.TV to see if we can uncover why nutritional recommendations are so all over the place.
We also want to explore if there might be a better, more intuitive way to think about food and eating.
You know, one of the first things that struck me when I started looking into all of this is that this whole obsession with healthy eating is actually a pretty recent thing.
It is, right? I mean, if you think about it, for most of human history, people just ate what was available to them, whatever they could grow or buy locally, and they cooked most of their meals at home. There weren't any fancy diets or complicated rules to follow.
Exactly. It was just like, here's some food, let's eat. But then came the Industrial Revolution and all these big changes in how food was produced and consumed. And suddenly we started seeing this rise in what they called civilization diseases.
No, yeah, like heart disease and type 2 diabetes.
Exactly. And as these conditions became more common, they put a huge strain on healthcare systems around the world.
So that's when government started to step in, right?
Yeah.
Trying to come up with dietary guidelines to help people stay healthier and maybe save some money on healthcare costs.
Right. I mean, it sounds good in theory, but the funny thing is, if you look at dietary guidelines from different countries, they are all over the map.
They really are. It's kind of crazy. Like Germany and France, they recommend 5 portions of fruit and veggies a day.
But then Denmark says you need 6. And Australia is like, no, you need 7.
Meanwhile, in Greece, Hungary, and Portugal, they're like, nah, 3 is plenty.
And then some studies even suggest aiming for 10 servings. It's like, who are we supposed to believe?
I know, you're telling me. It really makes you wonder how solid the evidence behind these recommendations actually is when there's so much disagreement. It's like they're reading a crystal ball. It's so subjective.
Absolutely. And you know what a lot of these guidelines are based on? Nutritional studies.
Oh, yeah, those.
Which, on the surface sounds all scientific and reliable, but when you actually start digging into how a lot of these studies are done, there are some pretty big question marks.
One of the biggest things that jumped out at me from the documentary was the fact that so much of the data in these studies comes from people self-reporting what they eat.
Through questionnaires, right? Like, tell me everything you ate in the past week.
Yeah, basically. And I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I could accurately remember everything I ate yesterday, let alone a whole week ago. I know, me neither. And let's be real, people aren't always completely honest on these questionnaires. I mean, are we all really diligently keeping track of every bite we take? Or are we maybe, just maybe, fudging the numbers a bit?
Totally. Like, who's
Yeah.
really going to admit to eating an entire bag of chips in one sitting?
Exactly. The documentary pointed out that there's this tendency for people to over-report the good foods they eat, like fruits and veggies, and under-report the bad stuff, like, well, that bag of chips.
Exactly. It's like they're trying to impress the researchers or something.
Right. So even before we get into the actual analysis of the data, there's already this potential for bias built in. And then there's the whole issue of correlation versus causation, which we all learned about in high school science class, but seems to get forgotten a lot when it comes to nutrition.
Oh, yeah. Correlation does not equal causation.
Right. Just because 2 things happen at the same time doesn't mean one is causing the other. Like, that classic example of red wine and heart health?
Oh, yeah. For a while, there were all these studies that showed people who drank red wine seemed to have healthier hearts. And so everyone is like, red wine is a magic potion?
Like, pass the Merlot, it's good for my heart.
Right. But then researchers started looking closer and realized that people who drank red wine also tended to have other things in common.
Like what?
Well, they often had higher incomes, better education, and maybe even less stress in their lives.
Oh, so it could have been those other factors that were actually contributing to their better heart health.
Exactly. The red wine might have just been along for the ride. But the media loves a good headline, so you saw all these articles claiming that red wine was the key to a healthy heart, even though the science wasn't really that clear-cut. So for you, the listener, the takeaway here is to always be a little skeptical when you see those headlines that make these big, bold claims about a certain food or drink being a miracle cure or a health disaster. look a little deeper, see what the actual study says, and if there might be other explanations for the findings.
That's good advice. And speaking of those attention-grabbing headlines, remember that whole thing a few years ago when the WHO, the World Health Organization, came out and said that processed meat was a carcinogen?
Oh yeah, that freaked everyone out.
It did, right? I remember people being like, bacon is gonna kill me.
It was a pretty big deal.
It was, and I think the way it was reported in the media kind of added to the fear factor
No.
because they classified processed meat as a group 1 carcinogen, which is the same category as tobacco and asbestos.
Right. But the thing is, the WHO wasn't saying that eating a hot dog is as dangerous as smoking a pack of cigarettes.
Oh, okay.
What they were really saying was that the evidence linking processed meat to cancer was strong. But that doesn't mean the risk is the same for everything in that category. It's kind of like, how should I put this?
Like a banana peel, right. The documentary used that example.
Oh yeah, the banana peel. It's a perfect analogy. So like a banana peel on the sidewalk is a potential hazard, but it doesn't mean everyone who walks past it is going to slip and break their leg.
Right. Some people might step right over it.
Exactly. Some people might not even notice it.
And some people might be wearing non-slip shoes.
Right. So it's all about the level of risk. And when you look at the actual numbers for processed meat and cancer, the increased risk is relatively small.
So it's not like a zero-risk situation.
No, of course not.
Yes.
But it's also not like a guaranteed death sentence. It's about understanding the nuances and not overreacting to those scary headlines.
Right. And I think this also highlights another important point, which is that sometimes the science itself isn't as clear-cut as we might think. There can be limitations to the research, and there can be other factors that influence the results. And sometimes there can even be bias involved.
Oh yeah, bias in research is a huge problem.
It is, and the documentary did a really good job of explaining how this can happen. Like, they talked about this guy named Professor Ansel Keys back in the 1950s. He was really convinced that dietary fat was the main cause of heart disease in the U.S.
Yeah, he was like, fat is the enemy, get rid of it.
Exactly. And he presented all this data at a big conference that seemed to prove his point. It showed a strong correlation between fat intake and heart disease deaths across different countries. The more fat people ate, the more likely they were to die from heart problems. So it seemed pretty convincing.
But the thing is, his data only included a small number of countries.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and when researchers looked at data from more countries, that clear-cut relationship between fat and heart disease, it just kind of disappeared.
It's like he cherry-picked the data that supported his theory.
Kind of. I mean, it might not have been intentional, but it shows how our own beliefs and biases can influence the way we interpret information. And, this kind of bias can creep into research in all sorts of ways. It can affect the questions researchers choose to ask, the way they design their studies, and even the way they analyze and present their results.
Yeah, that's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is. And it's not just limited to individual researchers. You also have the issue of funding, like who's paying for these studies, because that can definitely influence the outcome. The documentary talked about how the sugar industry was actually funding research to downplay the link between sugar and heart disease and instead point the finger at fat.
Really? I never knew that.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? They were literally trying to manipulate the science to protect their profits.
So basically, they were paying scientists to say what they wanted them to say.
Pretty much. And this kind of thing happens all the time. Big food companies have a lot of money, and they use it to influence research, lobby governments, and shape public opinion. So it's no wonder people are confused about what to eat. We're getting mixed messages from all sides.
Exactly. It's a lot for you, our listener, to deal with. So it seems like we're kind of stuck, right? We can't always rely on the science because it can be flawed or biased. And we can't always trust our own instincts because they've been hijacked by the food industry.
Well, it's not a hopeless situation. There are things we can do.
Yeah.
And the documentary actually offered some pretty interesting ideas about how to approach eating in a way that's both healthy and sustainable.
Yeah, like they talked about this concept called intuitive eating, which sounds kind of intriguing.
It is. The basic idea is that you learn to tune in to your body's natural cues and eat in response to your hunger and fullness signals. So instead of following some external set of rules, you're basically becoming your own expert.
Okay, so no more calorie counting or obsessing over food labels.
Right. It's more about paying attention to how your body feels. Like, are you actually hungry or are you just eating out of boredom or stress?
Yeah, that's something I definitely struggle with.
Me too.
Yeah.
And then when you do eat, how does the food make you feel? Are you satisfied? or are you still craving more?
Mm.
And intuitive eating also emphasizes the importance of honoring your taste preferences.
So, like, if you don't like broccoli, you don't have to force yourself to eat it just because it's healthy.
Exactly. Because if you hate it, you're probably not going to eat it anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's not just about taste. It's also about recognizing which foods agree with your body and which ones don't.
Okay, so like if you know dairy gives you an upset stomach, you would avoid it, even if it's part of some healthy diet plan.
Exactly. It's all about listening to your own body and figuring out what works best for you.
Okay, so intuitive eating is all about tuning into your body's cues. But how do we even know what those cues are anymore? I mean, we're so bombarded with messages about food from the media, from advertising, from our families and friends. It's hard to know what our bodies are really telling
I
us.
know, it's tough. The documentary talked about how our bodies are actually designed to tell us when we need food and when we've had enough. Like when our blood sugar drops, our stomach starts to growl, and our brain releases this hormone called ghrelin, which basically tells us, hey, you need to eat something.
So those are our hunger signals.
Exactly. And then when we eat, our bodies have all these mechanisms to let us know when we're full, like receptors in our stomach and intestines that send signals to the brain, and hormones like leptin that tell us we've had enough. And even our gut bacteria play a role in regulating our appetite. It's pretty amazing.
It is, but it seems like those signals can get messed up pretty easily.
They can, especially in our modern world where food is so abundant and accessible, and we're constantly being bombarded with cues to eat, even when we're not actually hungry.
Oh, yeah, like those commercials with the juicy burgers and crispy fries.
Exactly. Or just the sight and smell of food can trigger cravings, even if we just ate. And, stress can also play a big role in messing up our hunger and fullness signals.
I definitely eat more when I'm stressed.
Yeah, me too. When we're stressed, our bodies release hormones like cortisol, which can increase our appetite, especially for sugary, fatty foods. It's like our bodies are trying to self-soothe with food.
I know, I totally get that. And then there's the food industry, which is constantly coming up with new and clever ways to make food more appealing and addictive.
Right. They know how to manipulate our taste buds. Like they add sugar to practically everything to make it taste sweeter, even foods that you wouldn't expect to be sweet.
Yeah, the documentary said that sugar is added to something like 80% of processed foods. It's crazy.
It is. And not only does sugar make food taste better, but it also triggers the release of dopamine in our brains, which is that feel-good chemical that makes us want to keep eating more.
So basically, the food industry is hacking our brains to make us crave their products.
Pretty much. And it's not just sugar. They also use all these other tricks like adding salt, fat, and artificial flavors to make food more irresistible.
It's a lot to resist.
It is, and the result is that a lot of us have lost touch with our natural hunger and fullness cues. We eat when we're not hungry, and we keep eating even when we're full.
So does that mean intuitive eating is just a pipe dream? Like, we can't possibly go back to listening to our bodies when they're being manipulated by all these external forces.
Well, the documentary didn't suggest that we just blindly follow our cravings. I mean, if we did that, we'd probably all be living off of pizza and ice cream.
Yeah, that's true. My intuition tells me to eat a lot of pizza.
Mine too. And while there's nothing wrong with enjoying those foods sometimes, they shouldn't make up the bulk of our diets.
Mm.
So it's about finding a balance. The documentary suggested giving intuitive eating a try, but also being mindful of some basic scientific principles.
All right, so like a hybrid approach using both intuition and science.
Exactly. And they highlighted 3 specific guidelines to help us make healthier choices.
Okay, I'm listening.
So guideline number 1 is to protect your liver. Your liver is kind of like the detox center of your body. It filters out all the toxins and waste products, but it can get overwhelmed if we overload it with too much sugar and alcohol.
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically go easy on the sweets and booze.
It's exactly. Guideline number 2 is to nourish your microbiome, which is the community of trillions of bacteria that live in your gut. These bacteria play a huge role in our overall health, and they need fiber to thrive.
Okay, so that means eating plenty of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains.
Right. And the documentary had this funny suggestion about how to make those foods more appealing if you're not a big fan of veggies.
Oh, what was that?
They said to try relabeling them in your mind. So instead of thinking of them as boring vegetables, think of them as gut boosters or superfoods for your microbiome.
I like that. It's like a mental trick.
Exactly. And finally, guideline number 3 is to feed your brain by limiting foods that cause inflammation.
Oh, like what?
Well, sugar's a big one, but also omega-6 fats, which are found in things like sunflower oil and pork.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's processed foods and fast food, which are loaded with all sorts of unhealthy ingredients.
So basically, we want to focus on eating whole, unprocessed foods as much as possible.
Right. And remember, these guidelines are just a starting point. You can use them to help you make more informed choices, but it's important to also listen to your body and figure out what works best for you. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to nutrition.
And I think that's a really important takeaway for you, our listeners. There's so much conflicting information out there about what to eat, but ultimately, the best diet for you is the one that you can stick with, and that makes you feel your best.
Exactly. And the documentary made a great point about how eating should be enjoyable. It shouldn't be a source of stress or anxiety.
Yeah, if you're constantly worrying about every bite you take, that's not healthy either.
Right. So try to relax and enjoy the process of eating. Experiment with different foods, listen to your body, and trust your intuition. And remember, you don't have to be perfect. Just do your best to make healthy choices most of the time.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of nutrition, we've learned that the science isn't always clear-cut, that the food industry has a lot of influence over our food choices, and that trusting our intuition can be helpful, but it's not a foolproof solution.
Yeah, there's no magic bullet. But hopefully, by understanding the complexities of nutrition and the forces at play, you can start to make more informed choices about what you eat.
Exactly. And maybe even rediscover the joy of eating.
So here's something for you to ponder. What is your relationship with food? Are you constantly battling with it, or do you see it as a source of nourishment and pleasure? And how much do you rely on external advice versus your own internal wisdom when it comes to making food choices? Because ultimately, the journey of discovering what truly nourishes you is a personal one.
And it's a journey worth taking.
It is.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, we'll catch you next time.